Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Wrestling vs. the World podcast. And you're enjoying your day, sweet. If not, what the hell ever. So, it is time for an old school one, a documentary that I've seen so many times over the years, and I once kind of uploaded it to YouTube. I've mentioned this before on Instagram, but it is time to cover Hitman Hart, Wrestling with Shadows. Now, before I quickly talk about this, I'll bring up that I do remember seeing this documentary originally. I think it was called the ID channel. So it was my first exposure to this back before I really had that access to wrestling, like with compared to what we see today with what you can find on YouTube and all these other platforms and everything. So wasn't easily accessible, at least for my access back in the day. So let's get into this. So back in 1996, a documentary began filming the life and career of Bret Hart, one of the most well-known Canadian wrestlers of all time, and especially of his time. Bret would have his final year of the WWF be filmed for this documentary, from his return from his 1996 hiatus to turning heel after WrestleMania 13 to his controversial departure that he'd have in November. Yes, Montreal. Ugh, one of the most overly discussed topics in wrestling history. So let's look back on this. So one of the cool moments that I did like early on in the documentary showed Bret Hart being in India when he was WWF champion. Kids were happy to see him chanting, "We want Hitman." So that's a nice thing to see, knowing that you got fans so hardcore that they chant for you, even when you're in completely different countries where English might not be the most easily used language, like depending on what part of the world you're in, or depending on how thick your accent may be, might not be the most easily distinguishable. So, they also give a preview about Bret's night in the hotel room before Survivor Series, so they're kind of giving previews to what you'll see later on after this. Now, the true story starts back in 1996, showing Bret having a public signing in Calgary. It was either 96 or 97. They just showed Doc Hendricks with a cowboy hat saying, "Do you want to see him?" And we even see some backstage footage and everything, showing Bret having a hard time cutting promos and bloopers and all that stuff, because we know Bret had a hard time talking. We all know it. So then Bret, he starts talking about talking with his family backstage, including Owen, Bulldog, and Neidhart, saying like, Owen's one of the best technical wrestlers, Bulldog one of the strongest guys, Neidhart's a character, and we even see Vince Russo in some of the backstage footage. Why? But that's in the backstage footage where they're trying to prepare for the promo where the Hart Foundation's going to get ready to hype up their big tag main event in the main event for Canadian Stampede against Team USA. Now, one thing that they did that stuck with me in this documentary that I can appreciate was showing the fans' perspectives and talking with them about being wrestling fans and their alliances and so forth. And one fan that they interviewed in the arena said he loves wrestling because it's fun, and there aren't a whole lot of fun things in life that are fun anymore, which I wish fans nowadays would try to keep that mindset of. I'm sure it's becoming a bit more of that nowadays, but you hear within the last handful of years, it feels like fans are just watching wrestling to find something to hate on, rather than being actually happy and liking wrestling. Because how often did you hear fans ever talk about stuff they enjoyed? Instead, they're just talking about stuff that doesn't make them happy. It's like, are you fans having fun with wrestling anymore? Or do you just not have anything better to do because you're so stuck with watching wrestling all the time that you don't know how to watch anything that makes you happy? You're just stuck with this thing no matter what. So, I don't know. Now, Bret, he starts talking about other people in the back, and there's something that I have to kind of raise questions of. I know Bret has said this, and Sonny's denied ever doing this, but Bret claims that Sonny is just a friend. I honestly don't know. I'll tell you why. Whether or not something happened with Bret and Sonny ever, I'm not sure. I know Sonny's been flirtatious, and she's been with other men in the wrestling business, but there's something that was noted. For those who don't know, Bret's then-wife, Julie, who we see here in the documentary, she has her own autobiography, which I'll also mention a bit later on, called Heartstrings. And she has mentioned in her autobiography that Bret was not always faithful in their marriage, especially early on. So, if Bret did do something behind Julie's back, even with Sonny, it would not surprise me. I'm not saying that it did, but I'm saying it wouldn't surprise me if something happened, because again, Bret wasn't exactly faithful like he tries to portray himself to be. He even mentioned in the documentary he wasn't the greatest husband to Julie. Yeah, it's obvious. I mean, besides being on the road all the time, like I mentioned, you weren't exactly faithful to her. So, I don't know. I mean, Sonny also denied ever doing anything with Bret, but again, I can't really trust Sonny. So now we also, while showing some video footage and everything, we see Bret's iconic segment where he gave the kid glasses backstage in the backstage aisleway with the kid's dad around. And you also get a look into Bret's father, Stu. Family gathering for his birthday, which was huge. Talk about his tough upbringing leading to a wrestling career and shoot wrestling grappling, like for testing everybody's endurance and stuff like that. And then Bret discusses the nature of being safe in the ring, which I am glad to hear about, like saying that the goal of the in-ring part of the business is to make sure that yourself and whoever you work with come back as well as you possibly can both be going into the match. So don't try to hurt each other, try to break each other's necks or anything, just be as safe and smart as you can be. Plain simple. Bret also talked about a story where he confronted a bully who was picking on his sisters and beat the crap out of him after school. Okay. And they start jumping around a little bit with footage, which happens a good amount of times here, notably. Excuse me. They jump around about how Bret didn't know that the boys were going to lift him onto their shoulders at WrestleMania 10. It's like, okay, that's jumping a bit way too far back out of nowhere, because one moment you're talking about people bullying your sisters, and then you bring up how you didn't know the guys were going to raise you up in celebration for the end of the 10th WrestleMania when you won the belt from Yokozuna. Then comes the big part, everybody probably remembers, the Stu Hart Dungeon. Showing how the dungeon was there to train everybody, and that was Stu, like, being ready to be maniacal. And they had audio, like, of people screaming in the dungeon, being like, ah, ah, being, like, tortured and everything. It was like, God. And even in Stu's older age, he still knew how to make men scream in agony. Ay, ay, ay. And then Bret discusses how he didn't even want to get in wrestling growing up, but he kind of got forced into it in a little bit in a way. And you see some early footage of his stuff in Stampede Wrestling, so I'm glad to see that stuff. Show Bret's early time to show how far he's come. Then you get the talks about the WCW contract. So this was before Bret came back in October, November 96 on camera, because he disappeared for a while after WrestleMania 12. Talked about WCW was offering him a 3-year deal for $9 million, so $3 million a year. And then Bret was being offered a 20-year deal with Vince. And from what I've heard, there was some more inkling, like, stuff about the contract that wasn't talked about on camera. Like, of how Bret kind of used that, like, to try to get the deal up with WCW in order to get a better deal with WWF. It's like, it was less money, but it was also more about loyalty to Vince. And in the end, he sticks with the WWF for the 20-year deal, but that's going to bite him in the ass. And we also get backstage stuff, and this was something I liked, where they showed backstage talk with Pat Patterson trying to lay out the finish and the psychology during the match, but especially the finish for the Canadian Stampede tag match with, like, starting off hot with the fight between Bret and Stone Cold, trying to cool the match down, because it's, like, you can't just go, like, 20 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour full force nonstop during a long main event like that. Then how the finish played out, where Stone Cold fights with Bret's family at ringside and then gets thrown in, the roll-up and all that stuff. So I did like how they broke that stuff down and showed footage there to explain how the intricacies of a match is going to be done. Then you also get one that was a little bit hard to watch. The discussion of getting hurt in wrestling. So Bret talks about the time that he had a house show match. He didn't say what year, but it was in Toronto against Dino Bravo. Bret got knocked off the apron and smashed his ribs into the top of the steel barricade, breaking his sternum and breaking all of his ribs. Refused to be pinned in the match by putting his foot on the bottom rope and got himself counted out. And was out for 7 weeks to get, like, completely healed or try to fully recover from this. So, not fun to hear and see that footage. Then we also get some look into some characters here, like Mankind and Hunter Hearst Helmsley, and Bret acknowledges the shift in what fans wanted in wrestling characters. So the basic example being people cheering Stone Cold, and despite being a ruthless heel, fans look at him as being, quote-unquote, so bad he's cool, which is true. I mean, I know Stone Cold didn't pick up fire overnight after the King of the Ring promo that he had the year prior, but he started to pick up steam. I mean, look back at In Your House Mind Games, where he said, if you want the letter S, put the letter S in front of Hitman, you have my exact opinion of Bret Hart. Damn good line. So then, Bret gets shown he's talking on the phone with Vince, and discusses about turning heel, which Bret is initially is not fully sold in it at first, like he's being skeptical, but then he gets sold because he realized, hey, fans can only see the good guy rescue the woman on the train track so many times before they get tired of it. So it's true. Then he does a good job explaining the finish of the match where Stone Cold, being a classic good guy, WrestleMania 13, won't give up at the end, and like a classic bad guy, he's going to kick Austin while he's down, like kick him at the knee, not being happy with how Stone Cold passed out rather than tap out, and then walking away from a fight with Shamrock. So, yeah, good idea there. And he also shows love for the episode of Raw where Stone Cold beats him up in the ambulance, and then also goes back to his promo where he turned on the US after WrestleMania 13. But he's saying that, he also brings up something that I agree with, saying that he's taken this tough route of being essentially a full-blown heel in the United States and a babyface elsewhere, because he's hating on America and loving literally everywhere else because of morals and values based on all these different countries and continents. But the issue there, like, he's supposed to be a heel, because, like, oh, I hate USA, like, screw you guys and all that. But he's being more of a tweener because, like I said, playing to the negative reaction in one place and then also still playing to the positive reactions elsewhere. Your goal as a heel should be get hated everywhere. You shouldn't embrace when fans like you. The point of the villain is to make sure people despise you. So that was a messy route that they were taking, and that also bite Bret in the ass when you get to the end of the documentary. So then we also get footage from fans outside before SummerSlam, showing the divide between the American and Canadian fans, because at SummerSlam, it was Bret Hart, Undertaker for the title in the main event, Shawn as referee, with the stipulations being if Bret lost, he'll never wrestle in the US again. If Shawn is an impartial referee in any way, he'll also never wrestle in the US. So this is a big thing. And one dude, even American fans, shows his support for Canada and says it's just crazy how hardcore the patriotism is for the United States fans and how they're shitting on Canada and all that. It's like, yeah, it's pointless. I mean, like, you fast forward 27 years, you look at the state of this country, it's understandable. Like, the USA is not the greatest thing ever, to be quite honest. And then one thing I did like also here, you showed one fan that says she was so inspired by Bret Hart and his values that it led her from doing nothing with her life to going back to school for computer graphics, and she's getting ready to graduate. So, yay, a positive influence. Now, you also get some footage in the ring where Bret and Patterson are talking. It was like, you could see the Shotgun Saturday Night ring apron, like, still around. They're talking about how Shawn is essentially going to take Bret's heat with the finish, because you'll know about that later on, where Shawn's going to cost Undertaker the match. That's going to eventually turn Shawn heel. So Bret's worrying that's going to stop him from being the number one bad guy like he currently is. So you saw footage from the match with Bret and Undertaker. You get some backstage footage showing like Bruce Pritchard reacting and watching the monitors. And then everybody laughing where Shawn is confronting Bret. Bret's just like, fuck you, like with a steel chair. People are laughing like of Bret doing that, spitting Shawn's face, Shawn swinging the chair, boom, upside the head on Undertaker. Way before Undertaker would do the whole hands way up thing to protect himself, Bruce just about jumped in his chair. He's like, oh shit. So, I did like seeing that little part. Now, y'all then jump to parts where we're talking with the family, and we get talks with Julie, Bret's wife at the time, and she wishes that Bret would finally hang up the boots someday. It's been a long time in the ring and not being around with the family. And one thing I know she said in her book, she mentioned that in her autobiography that one of the scenes with her and Bret in this documentary was actually refilmed after they had already separated in May of 1998. Like I said, she didn't say which scene, but she said one of their scenes together was redone after they separated. So, I don't know which one it is, but I would like to know. But, yeah, if you have... Side note, not promoting, not being sponsored here, but if you guys want to read her documentary, like I said, go ahead, look it up. Hart for that kind of heart, and then Strings. Easy book to try to find there. But now we get to the build towards Montreal and how Vince rescinds his contract deal with Bret that he signed the year prior, citing financial peril. I think that's been disputed over the years because I know the WWF wasn't exactly hot by this point in late 97, but they were starting to turn things around for the business. And Julie, she can't wrap her head around this when Bret talks to her about this, because Vince came to their house and asked Bret to stay with him. Then all of a sudden, a year later, he takes back the deal. It's a little weird. And he mentioned how WCW at one point called him and asked him what it's going to take to bring in. He thought the deal had fallen through for that $9 million for 3-year deal. But they still wanted him so badly. And he wanted to stay in the WWF due to loyalty, but he feels like he's essentially being forced out. Like, there's no way that Vince is going to give him a new deal. Vince is pretty much saying, no, just go ahead, go to WCW. So he feels like he's stuck now in the WWF because he feels like when it's come to his character, he can't be a good guy anymore. Like, the number one good guy because of his promos on the US and how Shawn took his heat, so now he can't be the number one bad guy. So he's stuck to where he can't be the top guy no matter what side of the plate he's playing on in terms of a character. And then discusses how within 20 seconds he saw his career go away, faxing over a signed contract to WCW. So now he's confirmed to be WCW bound after Survivor Series. Now he talks about they also show where he's appearing on interviews with like freaking, I think it's like some kind of weird, some Canadian news show where he talks about his unhappy stance with how the WWF has become more raunchy and aimed at the adult demographic, which he kind of had to do in order to change things up and bring back in fewer interest, because they weren't doing a good job back in 95. We know what happened there. Then they also jumped to showing Vince's Cure for the Common Show promo, which was after Bret already left, so they're kind of jumping around with footage here for showing what happened and all that stuff. And you also show footage of Bret at a house show and how fans found out that Bret was leaving, and he essentially was leaving and was getting a bigger money deal. And Bret fans were having signs aimed at him and chanting, "You sold out, you sold out." Then Bret discusses the difficulty where Vince wants him to lose a title, and like he's on the phone and everything, and which Bret was saying no to. He's never said no to Vince before, and it finds it weird that Vince at one point says he can leave any way he wants, but then drops this saying that he can't have Bret appearing on Ted Turner's show with his belt, which Bret says he'll never do, and he's saying if he wants him to drop the belt, he'll do it, but just not in Canada, which I don't buy whatsoever. This has nothing to do with where Bret drops it. It more has to do with who Vince wants him to drop it to, because he has big heat at this point with Shawn. It has nothing to do with Canada. It's all about who he's asking to drop the belt to. Then comes the mention of his reasonable creative control that he has in the last 30 days of his contract, and Julie's showing concern that something may happen regardless of that, so we got foreshadowing. Then Bret saying that, he trusts that Earl won't let anything happen and swear on his kids. So again, a more eerie feeling there, because I remember Earl Hebner was interviewed for Dark Side of the Ring talking about the screw job and saying that before he went out to the ring for the main event, his job was threatened to make sure that he takes part in the screw job, otherwise he's out. So he was backed into a corner there. Now we get back to the hotel discussion from the night prior to Survivor Series. Bret feeling like losing the match will forever ruin his character, kill him off and everything like that. Then you get the backstage footage where, backstage during Montreal Survivor Series, people are talking to Julie saying like, can't believe that Bret is leaving, stay in touch and all that stuff. Which Julie knows everybody's means well, but everybody's just going to be memories. Their kids are never going to see these guys again. Like, Bret's son Blade, who's like, I think one of the oldest, if not the oldest of their kids, he's getting messed with by the headbangers and everybody's friends with him. But it's like it's going to be sad. He's never going to be able to really hang around with these wrestlers again that bring him memories. And thankfully, during one scene, you see Blade escape Sonny's grasp, like, thank God. And they show Blade, he's like hunched in a corner, like kind of looking like he's scared and sad. That he said he's not going to see these wrestlers again. He can't truly understand why his dad is leaving the WWF, which I know is understandable. It's a business thing. Blade's too young to understand it. Then comes the big talk. Bret goes backstage into Vince's office. He's secretly wired, and you hear the conversation where he's talking with Vince about the finish, where they seemingly agree on a small finish where it's going to be interference. Match is going to get thrown out, so Bret retains the title. It's because Bret, he wants to leave on a positive note. He wants to go in the next night, give a speech, say goodbye, surrender the title, to just leave on his terms, which Vince seems to be okay with. But then they splice in something weird here. So they're getting ready to show the main event. Like, they show Julie in the crowd, but then they show the opening pyro footage and everything from Raw before showing Shawn Michaels and Bret making their entrance, which, that doesn't make sense. Those two things aren't linked together. Like the, go ahead, fight the thorn in your eye, and pyro, boom, boom, boom. Like, you haven't seen the Titantron there from Raw, which wasn't even there for Survivor Series, so why splice that in? I don't get it. So we get different camera angles here from the documentary crew for the action, for the main event, nice touch. And then you get to the finish, which thankfully Bret also has his commentary to explain this, saying how Bret bumps the referee, sharpshooter on Bret reverses to put it on Shawn, you get the interference afterwards to get the match thrown out. But then we see the screw job ending where Earl gets up too fast, ring the bell. Shawn looks like he's pissed off, leaves with the belt. Bret spits on Vince. And then post-match footage, excuse me. You get the footage of Bret being talked to by Owen and Neidhart in the ring, smashing some of the announce table monitors, and then being brought to the back. Vince, by this point, has locked himself in his office, which is then later told in retelling or documentaries and retellings of this that Undertaker later went to Vince's office and demanded he get his ass out of there and talk to Bret. And then Bret, when he's in the locker room, talks to Shawn. He's like, Shawn, we're in on that. And Shawn denies full-blown any knowledge of what happens because Vince told him to. But then we know Shawn later on when WWE Confidential happened in 2002, his first act of business was to confess to knowing about the screw job, which I can respect. He finally opened up to first opportunity. He said he wanted to finally get off his chest and come clean. So thank you to Shawn for that. And the camera crew leaves as soon as Vince comes to finally talk to Bret, and Bret's just like, yeah, you guys get out of here. So we don't see any footage of what happened between Vince and Bret. And then we see Julie confronting Triple H backstage about the screw job, and she knows Triple H is lying when he's denying knowledge. He's like, no, you're full of shit. Karma's going to bite you in the ass. It's bullshit you guys did this to Bret and all that. So she knows he's lying. Then you get back to the locker room, and this is after Bret knocked out Vince, and he tells this thing that, oh, Vince, he somehow ran into my hand. Like, it drilled him, knocked him out. One of the guys next to him is like, you knocked out Vince McMahon with a punch? And you see Vince stumbling a little bit, looking completely out of it, walking through the backstage area, being like, oh, don't look at the camera, after the punch. So in Bret, he's like, yeah, I had to punch Vince. It felt right. You see a little bits of the Bret Screw Bret promo. They played some of it earlier, but now they play it again after the screw job saying, oh, Bret deserved it. He's being selfish and all that shit. And the documentary closes with Bret's family watching the DX segment where they brought in the mini Bret. And to close the documentary with the footage, they show him walking to the Hart family house with his father, saying that essentially the Hitman character was killed on that night. And I guess it was kind of true because you saw what happened in WCW being less than ideal in the eyes of the fans. But then again, did you really expect Bret to go in there and go straight to the top and you look at the names that were there when he got there in WCW? I think not. So yes, this was honestly one of my favorite documentaries that they've ever done. I know it wasn't like, there were some inconsistencies here, like with jumping around with footage and everything. Like I said, you talk with Bret's stance on being unhappy with how the creative direction is with the WWF, and then you suddenly bring in footage for Vince's Cure for the Common Show comments, which happened after Bret left. Suddenly talk about Bret's celebration of WrestleMania 10 and a few other things I brought up. But I mean, this is probably one of the best wrestling documentaries out there that wasn't produced by the WWE. Probably, like, the only other one that's notable would also be Beyond the Mat. Maybe I'll talk about this someday. I can't remember if I got it in my notes, but this was a great documentary. Like I said, I did love watching this when it played on the ID channel way back in the day, even if there was censorship, because like somebody saying shit and fuck, you have to censor it on TV, but I do love this documentary. Great thing. And I remember I uploaded this in like, back in the day, like in 5 parts on one of my old YouTube channels, like over 10 years ago. And the second part, like I had to divide it in 5 parts because that was when YouTube still had the upload time limit. And I think it was part 2 or part 3 actually got shared and retweeted by Shelton Benjamin. So that was a cool thing there. So anyway, let me know in the comment section below. What did you all think about the Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows documentary? Do you recommend it to anybody? And also, I might as well ask, what do you all think about what happened with Montreal? Was Vince right for screwing Bret out of the title, or should he have just let Bret leave on his terms? I mean, I can see both sides. Like, Bret does have in his contract reasonable creative control. He wants to leave on a positive note. It's like, okay. But at the same time, Bret, there's also the time-honored tradition. You lose on your way out. I know there's some wrestlers that haven't done it to this day. Like Undertaker, where he won in his last match. The same thing with Sting in AEW. But it's just like, it's a conflicting argument and topic there. So anyway, let me know what y'all thought in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's episode, folks, please remember, leave a like, subscribe with the bell, turn on if you're listening to YouTube, or follow if you're listening to this podcast on any other service that this podcast is available on, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Thanks for listening, folks. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out, and good day, everybody.